the year 950, deep inside the heavily guarded private chambers of the Great Palace in Constantinople, a Byzantine emperor was writing a book. His name was Constantine VII, and he was compiling a highly classified manual of statecraft for his teenage son, Romanos. The manuscript, known today as De Administrando Imperio, was never meant to be read outside the imperial family. It contained the empire's deepest vulnerabilities and most closely held strategies. It mapped out how to bribe rival kings, how to manipulate foreign diplomats, and how to govern a vast, continuously threatened Roman state. But in one specific chapter, the emperor's tone shifts abruptly from cynical political advice to a dire, almost desperate warning. He tells his son that foreign nations will inevitably come asking for a specified piece of imperial military technology. They will offer unimaginable wealth. They will threaten catastrophic war. But under no circumstances, Constantine writes, must this secret ever be shared. If any official or soldier attempts to reveal it, they are to be executed on the spot, anathematized by the church, and erased from history. Constantine claimed the secret had been handed down directly by an angel from heaven. In reality, it was born from the brilliant, desperate minds of men. It was a weapon of mass destruction that had saved Eastern Europe from total conquest. The Byzantines simply called it sea fire, or liquid fire. Today, we know it as Greek fire. And more than 1,000 years later, despite the best efforts of modern chemists, military historians, and weapons engineers, we still do not know exactly how they made it. To understand why a single chemical formula was guarded with religious fanaticism, you have to look at the world it was born into. The 7th century was an era of apocalyptic collapse. For hundreds of years, the Roman Empire, now ruled from the great eastern capital of Constantinople, had dominated the Mediterranean. But by the 630s, a new unstoppable force came storming out of the Arabian Peninsula. United by the young faith of Islam, the Arab armies of the Rashidun, and later Umayyad caliphates, shattered the old world order. They moved with a speed and tactical brilliance that left the older empires completely paralyzed. In a matter of decades, they wiped the neighboring Sassanid Persian Empire off the map entirely. Then they turned their sights on Byzantium. The Byzantine emperors watched in horror as their richest, most vital provinces fell one by one. Syria, the Levant, Egypt, North Africa, all swallowed by the rapidly expanding caliphate. By the year 674, the Umayyad Caliphate had built a massive navy, intending to strike at the absolute heart of the Byzantine Empire. They wanted Constantinople. Taking the city would not just eliminate their greatest rival, it would remove the final geographic bottleneck and open the gateway into the rest of Europe. Constantinople was arguably the most heavily fortified city on Earth. Its massive, triple-layered land defenses, the Theodosian walls, were practically impregnable to medieval siege engines. But the Caliphate didn't need to breach the walls. They planned to starve the city to death. The Arab fleet sailed into the Sea of Marmara and established a forward base at Kyzikos, just across the water from the Byzantine capital. From there, they launched a grueling, multi-year blockade. During the warmer months, hundreds of Arab warships choked the vital straits, cutting off Constantinople's crucial grain shipments from the Black Sea. Inside the capital, panic took root. Rations dwindled. Citizens stared out from the sea walls at a horizon dominated by hostile masts. Emperor Constantine IV knew that his walls could not protect his people from starvation. He knew his fleet was vastly outnumbered. The remnants of the Roman world were quite literally pushed to the edge of the sea, waiting for the final blow. It was during this desperate hour that a refugee arrived at the gates of Constantinople. We know very little about his background, other than his name and his profession. His name was Kallinikos. He was an architect and chemist who had fled the Syrian city of Heliopolis, modern-day Baalbek in Lebanon, after it fell to the Arab armies. Kallinikos did not arrive with a mercenary army, and he did not bring chests of gold. He brought an idea. In the workshops of Heliopolis, he had spent years experimenting with highly combustible chemicals. He sought an audience with the emperor, claiming he had perfected a volatile liquid compound that could burn on top of open water. Incendiary weapons were not entirely new to ancient warfare. For centuries, armies had used burning pitch, sulfur, and arrows wrapped in oil-soaked tow to set wooden ships and siege towers alight. But these early fire weapons were clumsy. They burned slowly, were relatively easy to extinguish with sand or vinegar, and often posed as much danger to the people throwing them as they did to the enemy. What Kallinikos proposed was fundamentally different. This was not just a flammable sludge thrown in a clay pot. It was a pressurized, continuous stream of chemical fire that could be projected across a distance. The emperor ordered his military engineers to give the Syrian refugee whatever he needed. Deep within the secure arsenals of the city, under a shroud of absolute secrecy, Kallinikos and the Byzantine mechanics went to work. They didn't just have to manufacture the chemical mixture. They had to invent an entirely new delivery system to weaponize it. They designed massive bronze vatsto heat and pressurized the liquid, connected to hand-operated iron pumps. These pumps fed into long, brass tubes called siphons, which were mounted on the prows of the Byzantine warships. To strike psychological fear into the enemy, the artisans crafted the nozzles of these siphons into the shapes of roaring lions, wolves, and dragons. By the spring of 678, the blockade was suffocating Constantinople. The Umayyad fleet gathered in the straits, an overwhelming forest of timber, preparing for another season of strangulation. Emperor Constantine IV realized that hiding behind the seawalls was no longer an option. The empire would either break the blockade now, or it would cease to exist. He ordered his fleet to sail out and meet the Arab armada head-on. As the Byzantine galleys, known as dromons, rowed out into the narrow, churning waters of the Bosporus, the Arab commanders must have felt immense confidence. They had the numbers. The standard naval tactics of the 7th century were brutal and straightforward. Ships would ram each other, shear off oars, and drop wooden boarding bridges, turning a naval engagement into a bloody infantry brawl on the rolling decks. The Arab ships moved into formation, closing the distance, preparing to board. The rhythmic beat of the rowers' drums echoed across the water. The gap between the two fleets shrank from hundreds of yards to mere dozens. Yet the men on the Byzantine decks didn't brace for impact with swords and axes. Instead, they stood dead still behind their bronze animal heads. Below decks, men frantically worked the heavy iron pumps, building up immense pressure inside the vats. The volatile liquid rushed up into the brass siphons. At the prow of the lead Byzantine ship, a soldier stood at the mouth of the bronze dragon, holding a burning torch. The Arab sailors, crowding the bows of their ships with grappling hooks in hand, watched the strange contraptions as the distance closed. 50 yards, 30 yards, 10 yards. Then, the Byzantine commanders gave the order. Valves were wrenched open. A deafening mechanical hiss drowned out the shouting of the oarsmen as a pressurized jet of dark, boiling liquid shot from the mouths of the bronze beasts. The fluid passed directly over the open flame of the torches and instantly ignited. A roaring river of liquid fire arched through the air and splashed violently across the wooden decks of the Umayyad warships. The Arab sailors were completely caught off guard. They had braced for the heavy thud of a ramming prow and the clash of swords, not an airborne torrent of flame. The fire didn't just burn, it stuck. The thick, tar-like substance coated the sails, the rigging, the wooden hulls, and the men themselves. Panic immediately set in across the vanguard, and the sailors resorted to their standard firefighting drills, throwing buckets of seawater onto the burning decks. But that only made it worse. When the water hit the Greek fire, the flames didn't die down. They flared up with explosive intensity. The substance was lighter than water, meaning it simply floated on the surface, spreading the inferno outward rather than putting it out. Desperate, burning men threw themselves into the Bosporus to extinguish the flames, only to discover that the sea itself was on fire. The surface of the strait became a burning lake, consuming anyone who jumped in. The Byzantine dromons rode methodically through the chaotic Arab formation, their bronze siphons continuously spewing jets of flame. The Umayyad vanguard simply disintegrated. Ships slammed into one another as helmsmen abandoned their posts to flee the heat. The once proud blockade fleet turned into a scattered mass of floating pyres. Those ships that managed to escape the carnage and retreat back into the Sea of Marmara were later caught in a violent winter storm, which sent most of the survivors to the bottom of the ocean. The siege was broken, the capital was saved, and the Byzantine Empire, which had spent decades steadily losing ground, suddenly realized it possessed the most devastating naval weapon on the planet. The exact formula for this weapon was immediately classified as the Empire's highest state secret. Production was heavily compartmentalized. The laborers who collected the raw materials did not know how to mix them. The chemists who mixed the compound did not know how to build the siphons. And the artisans who forged the bronze delivery systems did not know the chemical recipe. Because of this extreme paranoia, the exact composition of Greek fire died with the Byzantine Empire, leaving modern historians, chemists, and weapons engineers to argue over how exactly Callinicos achieved his miracle. We do have some strong theories, pieced together from surviving texts and the chemical realities of the medieval Mediterranean world. Most experts agree that the primary ingredient was crude oil, specifically a highly flammable, volatile fraction of it, known as naphtha. Natural naphtha seeps existed in abundance around the Black Sea, particularly in regions like the Taman Peninsula, where a light, highly combustible crude bubbled right out of the earth. But raw naphtha alone wouldn't have created the devastating effects witnessed in the Bosporus. Naphtha burns incredibly hot and fast, but it doesn't naturally stick to targets, nor does it burn with the thick, suffocating smoke reported in historical accounts. To make the weapon truly effective, Byzantine chemists had to engineer a medieval form of napalm. They likely used pine resin, a sticky sap widely harvested in the Mediterranean, to thicken the naphtha. This turned the volatile liquid into a heavy, gelatinous sludge that would adhere to the vertical wooden hulls of enemy ships and seep into the armor of soldiers. The most intensely debated ingredient, however, is what made the mixture react so violently to water. Some historians believe the Byzantines added quicklime to the mixture. Quicklime, or calcium oxide, generates massive amounts of heat when exposed to moisture. If a mixture of naphtha and quicklime was sprayed onto a wet deck, or if sailors frantically threw water on it, the resulting chemical reaction could generate enough thermal energy to vaporize the water and instantly ignite the naphtha. Other scholars point to calcium phosphate, a compound that creates a spontaneously combustible gas when it gets wet. Yet focusing only on the chemistry ignores half the genius of Greek fire. The delivery system was a marvel of 7th century fluid dynamics that remains incredibly difficult to replicate. Operating one of these flamethrowers on a wooden ship in the middle of a pitching sea was extraordinarily dangerous. Deep inside the hull of the Byzantine warship, operators manned a heavy brazier, heating the chemical mixture inside a sealed bronze vat. They had to get the liquid hot enough to lower its viscosity so it could flow quickly, but if they overheated it, the volatile gases would build up and detonate the ship from the inside out. Beside the heated vat, mechanics operated a sophisticated force pump. By driving heavy iron pistons up and down, they forced compressed air into the vat, building up immense pneumatic pressure. When the commander gave the order, a valve was opened, and the pressurized, boiling sludge was forced up a pipe, through the deck, and out of the swiveling brass siphon mounted on the prow. It required airtight seals, precision-cast valves, and a crew operating with mechanical rhythm while taking fire from enemy archers. If a single seal broke or a valve jammed, the high-pressure napalm would blow back into the tightly packed hull of the Byzantine ship. It was a terrifying weapon to face, but a profoundly nerve-wracking one to wield. For decades after the disaster of 678, the Arab navies stayed far away from the Byzantine capital. The psychological trauma of the burning sea lingered in the minds of their commanders. But empires of that size do not simply give up on their ultimate strategic goals. By the year 717, the Umayyad Caliphate was at the absolute peak of its territorial power. Its borders stretched from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the borders of India in the east. And they had spent the last 40 years quietly building an invasion force so massive that they believed no secret weapon could possibly stop it. Under the command of the brilliant General Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, an army of over 100,000 men marched overland through Asia Minor, while an armada of roughly 1,800 ships sailed up the coast. Their target was, once again, Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, meanwhile, was in a state of chaotic ruin. They had cycled through 6 emperors in just 20 years of bloody civil wars. The man currently on the throne, Emperor Leo III, had just seized power in a coup months before the Arab vanguard arrived. He inherited a completely exhausted, depopulated city with fractured leadership. In the late summer of 717, the Umayyad armada sailed into the Sea of Marmara, their staggering numbers turning the horizon into a solid wall of timber and canvas. But their commanders had learned from the past. As the massive fleet approached the straits, the Arab admirals issued strict orders to their helmsmen. They knew the Byzantine flamethrowers had a limited, close-quarters range. They intended to stay out of reach, bypass the city's seawalls entirely, and sever the Byzantine supply lines from a safe distance. As the massive heavy ships of the Umayyad fleet caught the autumn winds and began to maneuver up the strait, threatening to outflank the Byzantine navy entirely, Leo III realized that simply waiting behind his defenses was no longer an option. He ordered a squadron of his fastest, most agile dromons to row out and launch a surgical strike. The heavy Umayyad transport ships, burdened with vital siege equipment, grain, and thousands of soldiers, had sailed directly into the treacherous, fast-moving currents of the Bosporus. Their sheer size made them cumbersome. Unable to maneuver quickly against the opposing winds and the rushing water, the vanguard found itself temporarily stalled in the narrowest part of the channel. The Byzantine strike force closed the gap with terrifying speed. Before the Arab captains could fall back to a safe distance, the valves were wrenched open. The bronze beasts erupted. Jets of sticky, unquenchable flame washed over the colossal supply ships. The heavy timber caught instantly. Burning, crippled vessels drifted uncontrollably on the swift current, crashing into one another and creating a chaotic chain reaction of fire that clogged the strait. The Umayyad armada was forced into a humiliating retreat. Their plan to completely encircle the capital shattered in a single afternoon. That naval ambush dictated the ultimate fate of the siege. Unable to cut Constantinople's sea routes, the besiegers found themselves trapped in the open as the worst winter in living memory descended upon the region. Snow covered the ground for 100 days. The massive Arab camps froze and starved. When spring finally arrived, a devastating Byzantine and Bulgarian counterattack forced the Umayyads into a total withdrawal. Of the 1,800 ships that had confidently sailed toward the city, historical chronicles claim only a handful ever returned home. Greek fire had saved the Byzantine capital from a conquest that would have radically altered the map of Europe. For the next 7 centuries, it served as the empire's ultimate deterrent. It repelled the fleets of the Rus Vikings, shattered internal rebellions, and kept the sea walls of Constantinople safe until the twilight of the Middle Ages. But the empire's absolute dedication to keeping the formula a secret ultimately became its undoing. By compartmentalizing the knowledge so severely, the Byzantines ensured that no single person knew how to create the weapon from start to finish. When the empire inevitably fragmented and declined, the complex logistical networks required to mine the naphtha, harvest the resin, and forge the pressurized bronze pumps simply collapsed. The weapon didn't fall into enemy hands, it evaporated from within. The story of Greek fire leaves us with a profound historical paradox. The greatest military advantage of the medieval world wasn't stolen or defeated in battle, it was lost to paranoia. In their desperate drive to protect the very technology that kept their civilization alive, the Byzantine emperors ensured it would die with them. It is a stark reminder that knowledge locked away in the dark is knowledge eventually lost. An empire saved by a flame, leaving behind a secret so deeply buried that today, all we have left is the smoke. If you enjoyed diving into the lost secrets of the ancient world with us, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments below what other historical mysteries or ancient weapons you want us to uncover next.